Welcome to the deep dive. This week we're taking a look at a really interesting collection of, well, recent discussions, mostly coming out of News Van de Week.
Yeah.
We're going to be moving from, the important commemorations here in the Netherlands, Dodenherdenking and Beveringsdag,
Right.
touching on a potential mineral deal in Ukraine, navigating the complexities of NATO, European defense.
A lot going on there.
Definitely. And even looking at a debate about voting rights over in Estonia. It's a wide range.
It is.
But we're aiming to sort of connect the dots, give you a clearer understanding of what's really significant.
Well, and what's compelling, I think, about bringing these quite diverse topics together is how they sort of illuminate these underlying shifts and enduring questions, too. We're seeing the weight of history, how it shapes current events, strategic maneuvering on a, global scale, and these ongoing debates about what it even means to have a national identity today. So, our goal is to really extract the key insights and show you how these pieces might fit together.
Okay, so let's dive right in then. Dodenherdenking and Beveringsdag in the Netherlands, Remembrance Day and Liberation Day. Big one this year, the 80th anniversary of liberation.
80 years, yeah.
It's a major point of reflection.
Yeah.
And for me personally, this time always brings my family history right into focus. My mother's grandfather, he was lost during the liberation of Zuid-Beuveland.
Wow. See, that personal connection, it really underscores how national remembrance just intertwines with individual stories. Loss, sacrifice.
It does.
It's at these moments that the grand sweep of history, it becomes deeply personal, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
My own father, born in 1939, he actually experienced the liberation as a child. He was in Deventer, saw the Canadian soldiers arrive.
Wow.
Now he's in his 80s, and his recollections, well, they really bring home the fact that the generation with that firsthand experience of World War II is, passing.
It definitely makes you consider how we keep that sense of the past alive. For those who didn't live through it, the discussion mentioned the film Bonhoeffer, and it highlights how art can shape our understanding. Thinking about the war, my own father's experience, it had a profound impact. He was doing forced labor in Germany, and he encountered Alfred Rosenberg's myth of the 20th century.
Right, and the significance of that encounter, it lies in how it revealed the underlying ideology of Nazi Germany, didn't it?
Exactly.
It wasn't simply about military conquest. There was this comprehensive and frankly dangerous worldview driving it.
Yeah.
And that realization was so powerful for your father that it directly influenced his decision after the war to study theology, recognizing the critical importance of understanding people's, fundamental beliefs.
Precisely. And, often our understanding of World War II is very Western-centric.
It is.
But the discussion brought up the staggering scale of suffering on the Russian side. Estimates around 30 million deaths.
30 million. It's almost impossible to comprehend.
It really forces a shift in perspective on the war, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And connecting this to the present, that historical trauma, it continues to resonate in current conflicts. You see it notably in the war in Ukraine and the Russian narratives around denazification.
Right.
These deep historical wounds, they're being invoked and, in some ways manipulated in the current context.
Which leads to a really complex question then.
Right.
Should Remembrance Day here in the Netherlands broaden its focus beyond World War II? Should it include current conflicts, like the situation between Israel and Gaza? The discussion presented a pretty strong argument for keeping the focus of 4 May specifically on World War II and the liberation of the Netherlands.
And the reasoning behind that position is, I think, quite compelling. The idea is that by maintaining a specific focus on that fight for national freedom during WWII, and then the subsequent development of a sort of Dutch understanding of tolerance, you can achieve a depth of understanding that might get diluted if you try to encompass too many different conflicts.
Right, like a deep dive into one specific event reveals more.
Exactly. That a concentrated look at one pivotal historical period can reveal these universal truths about conflict, loss, the value of freedom, things like that.
It was also pointed out, interestingly, that the Netherlands doesn't really have a single national founding moment. Not in the traditional sense.
No, not like Bastille Day or the 4th of July.
Right. And that Remembrance Day and Liberation Day, to some extent, they kind of fill that role. They provide that point of collective reflection, a shared national identity.
Which raises an important consideration, doesn't it? How nations cultivate and sustain that shared identity. In the absence of one single foundational event, these commemorative rituals, they become vital. They unite people through common memories, common values. But yeah, the discussion also touched on the challenge, and it's growing, of connecting younger generations with the history of World War II, especially given the increasing diversity of the population through immigration.
That's right. How do you effectively transmit the significance of these events when those direct personal connections to the past are fading?
Well, the importance of ritual and storytelling was really emphasized. It seems crucial for bridging that gap. It needs to be more than just historical facts, right?
Let's to connect on a human level.
Exactly. And World War II, it undeniably had this profound, lasting impact on the Dutch post-war generation. It shaped the very foundation of the nation that was rebuilt. And this leads us to consider the balance, between the specific national experience being commemorated and the universal human lessons of World War II.
So it's Dutch history, but also bigger than that.
Precisely. While it's a particular moment in Dutch history, the insights into human behavior, the fragility of peace, the necessity of resisting tyranny, those are broadly applicable, universal, really.
There was a fascinating reference to Ernest Renan, suggesting that a nation is defined by its present will to live together.
Yeah, the daily plebiscite.
Right. Implying that we can reinterpret our shared past to forge a common future. It's about finding that shared purpose, even with diverse individual histories.
It's interesting to observe how different nations have grappled with their post-war histories. The discussion brought up the building generation, the Aufbau generation in Germany after WWII,
Right.
and then the subsequent critique from the '68 generation, referencing Ulrich Meinhof, a key figure in that student movement who questioned the, unacknowledged continuities of authoritarianism in post-war German society.
Because there was a sense that the immediate post-war period involved a degree of overlooking past involvement with the Nazi regime.
Yes, a sort of collective silence, perhaps. It's a really complex and often uncomfortable history, isn't it?
Definitely. The fact that former Nazi officials held positions in the post-war German government is quite startling when you think about it.
It is. And the discussion mentioned the difficulty of mourning during that period, with the
Wow.
church playing a significant role in trying to establish a new moral framework.
And looking at the broader impact, one of the enduring legacies of WWII is the establishment of international law, right? The attempt to create agreements grounded in human dignity, specifically aimed at preventing similar atrocities.
A noble attempt, certainly, born from terrible suffering. Yet here we are, currently witnessing a resurgence of far-right sentiment in Germany with the AfD, a political party, which sparks this debate about whether the nation can, or even should, move beyond the persistent guilt associated with World War II. It's an ongoing tension.
Okay, so shifting gears from these historical reflections, but maybe not entirely unrelated, let's unpack this reported mineral deal.
Yeah.
Between Ukraine and the U.S., apparently brokered with involvement from both Trump and Zelensky.
Yeah, this is interesting. The idea, as reported, is that U.S. companies would mine resources in Ukraine, potentially as a form of, repayment for U.S. aid.
Repayment, okay, and Zelensky has publicly expressed support.
He has. And Trump, unsurprisingly, has framed it in terms reminiscent of his whole art of the deal approach.
Right. But what does it mean practically?
Well, what stands out here is how it could reshape the dynamics of the war in Ukraine. The U.S. isn't offering explicit security guarantees through this deal, not that we know of,
Okay.
but the potential presence of American engineers on the ground could be interpreted as a kind of de facto reassurance.
Sort of human shield, almost.
Could be seen that way. It also appears that European involvement in this specific arrangement has been limited, sidelined perhaps.
And Putin's reaction.
Notably cautious, apparently, regarding potential peace talks.
It definitely feels like a potential turning point, doesn't it? With Zelensky and, Trump seemingly finding some common ground here.
It could increase pressure on Putin, potentially disrupt his previous assumptions about the consistency or lack thereof of U.S. support for Ukraine.
So does this maybe represent a move towards a frozen conflict? Is that what's being hinted at?
It raises that significant question, yes. It certainly introduces a new factor that all the involved parties will need to consider in their strategic calculations, a very big new factor.
Okay, so turning our attention now to NATO and European defense. The continued unpredictability surrounding Trump remains a key factor here, doesn't it?
Absolutely. His approach seems to involve creating a degree of, deliberate uncertainty, confusion even regarding the future stance of a potential Trump administration on issues like Ukraine.
Right, and if we connect this to the broader context,
Mhm.
It just highlights the intricate, sometimes strained relationship between the U.S. and Europe.
It does. And adding to this complexity, you've got upcoming elections in the UK, potential political shifts across Europe, and meanwhile, Russia's strategic objectives concerning Ukraine, specifically the annexation of those oblasts, and Crimea, they've remained remarkably consistent. Rock solid, you might say.
It really emphasizes the disconnect sometimes between some of the optimistic scenarios maybe envisioned in the West and Russia's clearly stated, quite determined goals.
Yes. And this mineral deal we just talked about, that could certainly factor into Russia's strategic thinking moving forward, changes the landscape.
And what about weapons supplies?
Well, this also brings to the forefront the ongoing discussion about providing weapons to Ukraine from the U.S. and Europe. There seems to be a noticeable shift towards arrangements that involve payment rather than solely relying on aid.
So more transactional.
Seems that way. And we're also seeing these, frankly, contradictory messages coming out of the U.S., concerns about corruption in Ukraine being voiced. Right alongside the pursuit of these potentially huge investment opportunities.
It paints a somewhat confusing picture, to say the least.
It does. European nations, on the surface at least, appear to be maintaining a more unified front alongside Zelensky, which stands in contrast to the more, shall we say, ambivalent signals coming from the U.S.
And meanwhile, peace talks aren't really going anywhere.
Previous attempts have been unsuccessful, yes. And with reports of a significant Russian military buildup, the possibility of a summer offensive looms large.
And the human cost. Just immense. Ongoing.
It cannot be overstated. In response to this whole evolving landscape, we are seeing an increase in defense spending across Europe. Initiatives like the Rearm Europe plan, the Netherlands aiming to meet that 2% of GDP target, finally.
And the upcoming NATO summit in The Hague?
Yeah.
That could be quite significant.
Potentially very significant, especially given Trump's recent statement about possibly not attending.
Because of spending.
Because of his perception of insufficient defense spending by European members? Yes.
It almost feels like a strategic game of bluff poker. Countries may be increasing their defense pledges to try and influence Trump's position.
Could be an element of that. But the historical context here is undeniable.
Yeah.
Decades of underinvestment in European defense, the long-standing reliance on the U.S. security umbrella. That's the backdrop.
And this shift, it also has implications for how we think about nuclear deterrence, doesn't it?
Yes. The increased possibility of large-scale conventional warfare below the nuclear threshold, it seems more apparent now, which reinforces the argument for investing in robust conventional defense capabilities.
But it also raises important questions about the motivation, right? Is this increased spending driven by genuine strategic necessity, or is it primarily driven by fear?
That's a crucial question, and there's a potential danger in creating too strong an enemy image. The discussion touched on the importance of a balanced approach, combining necessary defense measures with sincere diplomatic efforts.
Like the Lubbers example.
Referencing the way Rude Lubbers handled the cruise missile crisis, yes. A kind of firmness combined with dialogue. It's a relevant historical example, perhaps.
It's interesting also to consider the argument that the West might have missed an opportunity for a different kind of relationship with Russia back in the post-Cold War era.
That's a big what if, isn't it? The role of neoconservative ideology in shaping U.S. foreign policy, its emphasis on promoting democracy abroad, that was mentioned too. Alongside the perception, in some parts of the world, of Western actions as having, well, neocolonial undertones.
We are clearly moving towards a more multipolar global order.
Right.
You see the growing influence of Asia, China, India.
Definitely. And a relative shift in the West's global standing. Europe needs to adapt to this evolving reality. The suggestion of potentially ceding a UN Security Council seat to India.
Wow, that's significant.
It was presented as an example of the kind of adaptation that might be needed, thinking outside the old boxes.
This shift also prompts us to question some of the traditional indicators of Western strength, doesn't it? Like U.S. economic growth figures.
Yeah.
Especially when you factor in things like healthcare costs or life expectancy.
Exactly. The headline numbers don't always tell the full story. Ultimately, though, the importance of upholding European values, defending constitutional democracy, that remains paramount.
Absolutely. But while also recognizing the limitations of trying to impose these systems on others.
A tricky balance.
Yeah. And on the European political scene, recent developments. Romania was mentioned.
Yes, elections and developments, the cancellation of a political candidate, the emergence of a pro-U.S. movement, things are shifting.
And the broader trend, it seems, of established political orders facing challenges to their legitimacy. That appears to be continuing. We saw it in the recent local elections in the UK, the rise of Reform UK.
And we're observing similar patterns elsewhere, too. Trump's apparent success in reducing illegal immigration in the U.S. was mentioned, as was the reaction against political rhetoric, similar to Trump's in the recent Canadian elections. So, push and pull.
And finally, the discussion just touched on the potential for conflict between nuclear-armed India and Pakistan over Kashmir.
The perennial flashpoint.
And Narendra Modi's decision not to attend the 9 May celebrations in Russia. Just highlighting the persistent risks of broader geopolitical instability. It's all connected.
It really is.
Okay, finally, let's turn to Estonia. This proposal to potentially strip Russian citizens, those holding Russian passports, of their voting rights in local elections, citing concerns about undue Russian influence.
Yeah, this is a difficult one.
It raises some fundamental questions, doesn't it?
It does. What's particularly concerning here is the potential conflict with core European values, principles related to human rights, civic participation. It also echoes some of the complex issues we've seen play out in Ukraine regarding the rights of Russian-speaking populations. Now, the percentage of the Estonian population directly affected might be relatively small, but the precedent it sets could be counterproductive. It could potentially reinforce negative narratives from Russia, foster resentment within those affected communities.
You can understand the vulnerability, though. The Baltic states feel exposed. The security concerns driving their policies are clear.
Absolutely understandable. However, this type of action could well face legal challenges at the European level.
Right.
It raises this important question about finding alternative approaches. How do you effectively address legitimate security concerns without exacerbating tensions, without further polarizing communities?
It's crucial, isn't it, to avoid just equating the current Russian state directly with the Soviet Union or assuming all Russian passport holders think the same way.
Exactly. Acknowledging the diversity of opinions and perspectives within the Russian population itself, both inside and outside Russia, seems vital.
So as we conclude this deep dive, it's really striking how interwoven these seemingly disparate events truly are.
It is.
The echoes of historical trauma, they continue to shape current conflicts. Shifting global power dynamics influence national decisions. And the very essence of European identity, well, it remains a subject of ongoing evolution, doesn't it?
The interplay is undeniable. Historical memory, present-day conflicts, the future trajectory of Europe and the wider world, it's all tangled together. Which leaves us with a final thought, perhaps for you, the listener. Consider the long-term consequences of these interconnected trends. What choices lie ahead for individuals, for nations, as we navigate this really intricate landscape? Maybe the fundamental challenge is finding that sustainable balance
Between
the importance of national identity, national memory, and the necessity of upholding universal values in what is clearly becoming an increasingly multipolar world.
a huge challenge. And as we've discussed these significant global issues, it's important to remember the distinct character of this time right now in the Netherlands.
Yes.
With the solemnity of Dodenherdenking on 4 May leading right into the celebratory spirit of Bevringsdag on 5 May, especially this year, the 80th anniversary.
Those expressions of national identity, the flags, the ceremonies, they're likely to be particularly visible. A moment of reflection, but also, hopefully, of connection.